Trump-Putin or Russia-America dynamic is not a simple one. Putin and Trump have got along in the past. One of Trump's big motivations is to advance the US fossil fuel economy. More gas production, more oil production. That's clearly going to happen. And he will be searching for new markets.
You think Russia-Ukraine war will end?
They don't know how Trump will respond. In what way? Military, non-military, whatever.
What is the role of Elon Musk in this election?
Things about Trump is he thrives in being seen as unpredictable. When you make it political, there is no question of a compromise. It's a matter of national dignity and honor.
How do you think Trump is going to handle Trudeau? Namaste and welcome to the Rising India podcast. Our guest today has left his stamp as a journalist, a writer, a bureaucrat, and now a consultant to global companies. The first half of his life was as a journalist in newspapers. I met him at the Indian Express when both of us were editors there. He then moved on and joined us at the Observer Research Foundation as a distinguished fellow. So that makes two places where we have worked together. In 2012, he wrote a book titled India, Spirit of Enterprise. The book encapsulates the story of the growth of India's leading private sector businesses since India's liberalization began in 1991. And then, after all this, the government took him away from the world of ideas into the world of action. Between 2017 and 2019, he served as the principal speechwriter and spokesperson for the President of India. Over the next 3 years, he was a policy advisor and additional secretary in India's Ministry of External Affairs. There, he helped shape and explain India's foreign policy in a crucial and eventful period for the international system. Today, he is a partner at the Asia Group and the chair of its New Delhi-based subsidiary. Here, he brings his 3 decades of experience and knowledge at the intersection of business and politics. At the Asia Group, he advises clients on tailored strategies for market entry and expansion in India, enterprise-level risk management, and crisis mitigation. His areas of expertise include India's foreign and trade policies and the government's approach to international business, resilient supply chains, and national capacities. Welcome back to the Observer Research Foundation, Ashok Malik. Very happy to have you at the Rising India podcast.
Thank you so much, Gautam. I'm glad to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
So I have 5 sets of questions regarding the US elections and its impact on the world, not just India, across the world. But first, before I start, tell us, how have you managed to straddle so many careers and deliver excellence in all of them?
No, I've just been fortunate because, yes, I have moved from one career path to another. It wasn't always planned. Sometimes opportunities came up. I didn't expect to be joining government. For instance, I didn't expect to be joining a private sector consultancy, business consultancy, and running a large team, which I am now. I'm not suggesting I know all the pillars of expertise that the Asia Group works on. We have individuals who are specialists, but I manage a large team here as an administrator and contributing to some of client servicing. I didn't expect that to happen either, but I have been fortunate. I would only say that there is one undercutting theme or one underlying theme across all the career options I've chosen, which is an engagement with policy. Whether as a writer, a commentator, or in a think tank, whether in government, where in the corridors of where policy is shaped, being a part of that, having a ringside view there, sometimes contributing, and now working at the intersection of business and policy. Perhaps this was always the case, but certainly at this juncture in human history, the intersection between my old job at the MEA and my current job as a business consultant is enormous. Business decisions, investment decisions today depend more than they perhaps have in several epochs on geopolitics, on foreign policy, on trade policy, which is again determined by national strategic goals and composite national power, not just on pure economic concerns or principles. So in that sense, yes, I've had different professions, but it's also in a sense a tribute to how far engagement with policy can take you in very different directions. And I suspect I'm not the only one who's experimented with so many different aspects of policy.
No, for the last decade, we've seen several private sector people join the government.
True.
Many from the government
Move to the
take
private sector.
sabbaticals and work in think tanks. Many from the armed forces, for instance, they are housed in Observer Research Foundation. So what would you advise? Like, being a journalist and being a thinker, a think tanky, is okay. It's just a deeper work than reporting or instant opinionating. But from there to move into actual execution with having a lot of sensitive information inside you and not being able to, ethically share that information, doesn't the itch bite you? How do you negotiate these two paths?
Look, yes, it does bite you initially. I spent 5 years in government. They were life-altering. It was a mid-career university. It has left me a completely changed person, and for the better. But both in government and now in my current job, I have more access to information than I did as a journalist or as a member of a think tank or an academic in a think tank. Yet, while I know more, I also know more that I know less, because the ambit in which one works is much wider, and one realizes that there are so many unknowns out there which one will never fathom. I still remember the day I was offered a job in government in 2017, in July 2017. I went home and told my wife. I accepted immediately, and a very senior person in government had offered me the job. So I happened to know Mr. Arun Jaitley, then the finance minister. I happened to know him personally. So I called up his office to speak to him. He was in a meeting. I left a message that I'd like to speak to him whenever he's free. And he was kind enough to call back a few hours later. So I told him, this has happened. I've got this job offer from the government, from Rashtrapati Bhavan. Said yes. He didn't respond with congratulations or anything of that sort. He came straight to the point. When he was a man of many words, but when he wanted to come to the point, he just came straight to the point. He said, Ashok, you will face one principal challenge, which is this. Right now, you are a commentator, a writer, a talking head on television. You're in a think tank. You know a little bit. Whatever you know, you put out immediately with your analysis and interpretation. In government, in the bureaucracy, you will know much more. You will have access to much more. Your big challenge will be to keep information bottled up, to keep it silent within you. That is an institutional challenge. That is also a personal challenge, and you have to live up to it. And he was just so right. It was very wise advice. It wasn't congratulations, well done, come home and have coffee, or nothing of that sort. It was just very sharp and very to the point advice, which was needed. And all my 5 years of government, I realized he was dead right. It's not just keeping things to yourself as a discipline test. It's also that when you're sitting with civil servants who are career civil servants, you're only a temporary civil servant for 3 years or 5 years, whatever your contract period is. In those 5 years or 3 years, you have to conform to the norms of a civil servant. If they follow certain discipline and certain rules, you have to follow the same rules. You can't say, I'm the insider outsider. There's no such thing as an insider outsider. You are either you're inside or you're outside. And so when you're sitting in meetings, you need to give your colleagues the trust that they can speak freely without you thinking of your next column or a book after you left. So somebody asked me, will you write a book on your days in government? I said, not even accidentally.
That would be a huge loss for us. But let me push a little further. We had Montek Singh Ahluwalia sitting where you are a few weeks ago. And in his book, Backstage, he had mentioned a beautiful paragraph on how to negotiate as an outsider in the inside of finance ministry, or I think, or was it commerce ministry that he joined?
He was
first?
in commerce, and yes.
Yeah. So, and his advice was that, all of us have ideas, all of us come with ideas. We are almost arrogant about our ideas, but that's not the way to get things done. You have to you have to place that idea, allow it to flower, and let somebody else talk in a manner that it becomes his idea. Did you?
Absolutely. Look, I went to the MEA, for instance, as a policy advisor and additional secretary. Now, if I gave suggestions, they were listened to. Sometimes they were rejected. Sometimes they were accepted. Okay? And you have to live with that. And it's not that every idea I give has to be accepted. That's not possible. Because sometimes you can't convince people. Sometimes there are other factors that you don't realize, which they realize. But when it comes to idea execution, you have a role, but the person who's the joint secretary or the secretary driving that particular relationship or that particular theme or that particular thematic area will take the lead role. It becomes his to execute or hers to execute. And that is how government works. That is how, not just government, that's how large institutions work. And you have to be alive to that. You can't say that, no, this is mine, I'll do it my way, I take all the credit. That's not possible, because you have to, there's a phrase I picked up in government, lead from behind. Attempt to lead from behind. And you become part of a much larger machine, but sometimes that small idea can have disproportionate impact, even without you seeing it through. But somebody else sees it through, which is fine.
So now you are in the corporate sector, and you're not thinking of your next job maybe as a rocket scientist or SpaceX astronaut or...
No. I have no desire to be a SpaceX astronaut or go to outer space. I'm quite happy with the current job because it keeps me with one foot in the policy world and one foot in the world of business. The Asia Group is US headquartered. The India subsidiary is fairly recent. But it's growing rapidly, and there is an excitement about being part of an institution that is almost a startup in India, and trying to build something which will last.
So all the best from all of us here. So let's come to the topic, which is US elections. Trump is back. Kamala Harris has lost. And while the elections were going on, we were on the edge as to who will win. I mean, he's not my president, I don't care. But whoever is the president of the United States does have an impact on rest of the world, even if it is marginally. So now Trump is there, and so first set of questions, I'll talk about the big picture. I think among his, he made a 20-point agenda, equivalent of a manifesto in India. And one of the things was to make America great again. I think it's a very well-crafted slogan. Make America great is yesterday's news. Make America great again tells you that we have lost our greatness in the past 4 years, perhaps, or sometime. So is this an autarkic ricochet of excessive globalization? Will the charm of globalization reduce? Because if it is America to become great again, and he has followed it up with several other objectives, which we'll discuss later, can we see a deglobalization accelerating over the next 4 years under Trump?
Well, more than deglobalization, I'd prefer to call it calibrated globalization, because globalization can't completely go away. But it is clear that for some time now, not just with Trump, but even before Trump, and not just in the US, but in several countries, there has been a pushback against unbridled trade arrangements, maybe idealistic trade arrangements, and against a globalization model that has allowed capital to flow in and flow out, sometimes destabilizing domestic financial systems, as we've seen with the Asian flu 20 years ago or 25 years ago, as well as an influx of cheap goods produced elsewhere in a far-off country, sometimes with input costs that are not quite economically justified or remain suspicious, and which end up hollowing out industrial capacities and communities in the middle of your country. So I'm not suggesting this creative destruction has not been a part of economic history through the ages. It has. I mean, even the Industrial Revolution 300 years ago, 200 years ago, did change communities in, let's say, England. Put some people out of jobs. Those satanic mills that William Blake spoke about. He was representing a certain angst against the early industrialization. I'm not saying that does not happen, but there is a human cost. And especially in an age of democracy, when those who are suffering that human cost have a vote, have a voice, and have large numbers, they will end up affecting electoral choices. Trump represents that, but to be honest, he's not the only one who represents that. If you look at the debate about has globalization and free trade and opening up America's markets to goods and services from everywhere served the American people or just served some corporations, is a debate that America's been having since at least 1999, when there were those large crowds in Seattle outside the WTO conference, if you remember. I mean, that was the first big anti-globalization campaign, and it took place not in a poor third world country, it took place in America, in the United States itself.
Stiglitz wrote about
yes.
About
that. Clinton had to come out, and he was president. He had to come out and meet the crowds. And then you had, the following year, the election, you had Al Gore, who was campaigning as a globalization skeptic. And it simply moved on and on and on. And I think the economic dislocation, especially in what we call the Rust Belt in America, in the American Midwest, in the American South, has left people searching for answers. And this year they seem to find an answer, they seem to find hope in Trump.
So I'm a little, like I don't have the answer to this question. I've thought a lot about it. Is this a discussion? Is it a conversation? Is it a fight between capitalism and democracy? And if so, Trump is on both sides. He's a capitalist as well as he has now won the election. So somehow Trump is able to put together both these apparently conflicting ideas of capitalism and democracy together and cart it. So what's the promise here?
I get what you're trying to say. That is there a conflict between, when you say capitalism, you mean textbook economic principles and democracy. I see what you're trying to say. I guess in the real world, you have to treat the market as a system of efficiency rather than a dogma. That is what most serious politicians will tell you, because you have seen in the past 10 odd years, post-COVID, post the pushback against China, you have seen the return of industrial policy. In countries that have not known industrial policy. Yes, America has not seen industrial policy since the 1920s or 30s, post-depression.
The deal.
New Deal.
The New Deal.
Roosevelt's New Deal, post-depression,
yes,
post-29.
That's right.
But you've seen the return of it. And you've seen it in other parts too. You've seen it in India as well, where in the early 2000s, we signed a number of FTAs, including with ASEAN partners, countries to our east, with a lot of hope, aspiration and idealism. There was almost this charming belief that as market access opened up to our FTA partners, domestic industry would automatically reorganize itself and avail those opportunities. The reality didn't quite work out that way. It led to a supply chain dependencies. It led to at some point influx of cheap Chinese goods, for instance, or not just Chinese goods, but largely Chinese goods, which made many of our SMEs and job-creating industrial units here, smaller industrial units here, unviable. Now, from a purely capitalistic or economic efficiency point, the more efficient company destroyed the less efficient company. I get that. One of them may happen to be Chinese or Korean or Thai, the other one may happen to be Indian. But there is a social cost, there is a political cost, there is a human cost. And no society can completely ignore that. So a balance has to be met between textbook economic principles and social equity.
Here's my, not rebuttal, but so when it comes to Indian goods versus Chinese goods, I think Chinese goods are backed by state capital, Indian goods by private capital, one. Second, Indian entrepreneurs are bound in a thick regulatory framework, which exists even today. And doing business is not easy.
I agree.
The fact that people are able to do business is a kudos to them. All these large companies that have grown large, they are temples of Indian entrepreneurship. And so with their hands tied twice behind them, one on the finance side, one on the operational regulatory side, and even in let us say electricity cost side, so input side, it's always been an unfair competition. But when you compare with Indian goods with say European or American goods, there it's more or less. I think the stakes are simpler or more or less equal, and there is the actual fight of capitalists. This is a distortion.
This is a distortion, and it's a distortion between India and China, for instance.
Right.
It's a distortion not just because we are bound, we bind our companies with greater regulation. That is true to some degree. I'm not denying that. But it's also because there is a lot of suspicion about input cost and how inputs are priced in China. There is, look, more than one company I work with, which is planning an investment in India, in manufacturing, in chemicals, for instance. I can't name the clients, but there are concerns about what happens if the Chinese begin dumping the very commodities or the very products in the Indian market to make that investment unviable. How will the Indian government respond? Will there be quality control orders? Will there be anti-dumping measures? These are questions companies are asking, and this is a genuine concern. Now, the Chinese, of course, say that, no, we are not underpricing our goods, but the suspicion remains. And the whole idea of industrial policy or of what we call the PLI schemes is to provide some sort of an early subsidy to ensure that there is domestic capacity, there is domestic manufacture, not just for economic resilience and stability, but also eventually to provide jobs and employment, direct or indirect, to people. And no democratic government can ignore that.
Now, let's assume there is no China. Then globalization and democracy, are they in sync?
More so, I would say. I think we're all responsible, and starting with the US, for making China the giant manufacturing. Look, I have no problem with China being a manufacturing country. It's a lot of credit, full credit to China for achieving what it has. But the degree of sourcing concentration in China, the degree to which we are dependent on China for not just semiconductors or equipment for solar energy, but also for very cheap goods, such as cheap laptops, not for the Indian Army general, but for my daughter doing school homework, or for kitchen utensils. Why should we be importing kitchen utensils from China? I can understand Australia importing kitchen utensils from China. Australia is a country of 25 or 27 million people. If it starts making frying pans and saucepans at home, it will be very expensive. But for a country like India, 1.4 billion people, we buy a lot of saucepans, we buy a lot of frying pans. And we can't run a trade deficit with China because we're buying frying pans from there. We need to make them here and provide jobs to people here. So that trade-off is clear.
So now when Trump says, let's make America great again, and it sounds a little autarkic, and in some points it may also turn out to be autarkic. Is it the equivalent of weaponizing the economy? For instance, if you and I share the same values, let us say on democracy or free speech, we come together versus, say, China or, in their opinion, Russia. We don't want authoritarian regimes. We'll work with democracy to democracy and keep. Is value intrusion into economics going to happen over the next 4 years?
So value intrusion into value chains, in a sense. Well put. I would hesitate to call Trump autarkic or isolationist.
I'm not calling him. I'm saying there will be elements of autarky. For instance, if he says America first and manufacturing first, which we'll come to a little later, then clearly he's taking a stand which is beyond economics, beyond raw material cost, price, etc. He's taking a political stance.
Yes, he's taking a political stance. He's probably also escalating to de-escalate, if you know what I mean. Taking a strong position from which he can then talk himself down. But what is he essentially doing? He's essentially saying that if you want access to my market, which is the world's most valuable consumer goods, or just the most valuable market, period, then what do you give me in return? I cannot be running large unsustainable deficits with China, with many countries in Asia, with Germany. I need a more equitable. He's responding like a businessman. Now, deficits are a part of international trade. We all know that. But it's easy for you and me to say that while writing an analysis. For the politician who sees what large deficits are doing to sections of his society, he obviously has a different answer. And he's thinking transactionally. He says, large deficits are not sustainable, so what can you give me in return? To be honest, this is Trump's philosophy, but it's not just Trump's philosophy. Biden did just the same thing. Otherwise, you think at the price points and the wages in America being what they are, do you think America has any rationale to be setting up fabs? It's much cheaper to set up those fabs in Asia. But it's doing it because it's doing it to build industrial capacity, to build de-risking.
So fabs is a aberration because every country is putting subsidies into. India is also doing it. I think Taiwan has
from a textbook economic point, it probably doesn't make sense. Textbook economic sense. From a political sense, from a national security sense, it makes perfect sense. So he, in a sense, he's what Trump offers two things, or Trumpism, I would say, offers two things. And Trumpism now has resonance in America beyond Trump. One, if you want access to my market, what are you giving me in return? I can't manage unsustainable deficits all my life. And second, America is overstretched internationally. We made a lot of global commitments. I will now make commitments that have a calibrated return on investment. I'm not going to make commitments.
There will be some positive unintended consequences in the sense if America really becomes America first and let's make America great again. And it means, it could even mean a reverse FDI inflow into America. Where the manufacturing could be or the facilities could be so attractive to entrepreneurs that, the whole model of cheap labor or capital efficiency, etc., may just go out of the window through one stroke of a pen.
Look, I think that's already happening. And frankly, Trump won this election, but Trumpism, as I'm saying, which is something he embodies in a sense, was also to a large degree embraced by Biden and Jake Sullivan's economic and foreign policy strategy, for instance. And he put it more intellectually, Trump has put it more instinctually. But you can see common elements. And if you ask me, the economic story of the coming 10 years or of our age, of course, there is a strong Indian economic story, no question. There is a strong Indian growth story. But America is also going to grow. And if I had to put, if I was an investor with a global sort of ambit, and there were two pots I had to put my money into, I'd put half my money into India and half my money into America, or something like that. These are the two great growth engines of the next decade, I would say.
Okay, so now let's imagine that FDI is there, manufacturing has moved. How will labor wages function? Because one problem that citizens of America have been having is median wages have remained more or less stagnant, and taxation. So if labor wages aren't going up, already America is very high on the inequality index. It's more than 40.
Yes,
And that's more than, I mean, it's skewing the G20 averages. India is doing much better. So at 40, and there will be even greater concentration of wealth, given that labor may not be either available or willing or accepting the kind of wages that are being offered.
I completely agree with you because, when you cut taxes, when you push for manufacturing, which is very technology dependent, which is going to be, you improve national economic indices. Do you immediately create lots of mass jobs? Even in America, you don't. That is a circle that Trump will have to square. I don't know how he's going to do it.
Because on one side, there are incentives to capital. On the other side, if you say, here's a higher minimum wage or living wage or howsoever you define it, then those constraints and the wage levels there are not like India. They are much higher.
They're much higher.
Multiples.
They're much higher. And you can't. So he will have to focus on what he wants to manufacture at home and what he doesn't. Obviously, it doesn't make sense for him to, tell footwear factories from Taiwan or China or India to come back to Middle America. That's simply not possible. The shoes will be very expensive. And even with the tariffs he's promised, there is the risk of inflation.
We'll come to that separately. Yeah, because the other the reaction of like if you were to put half your $1 billion in America.
No, but I'm not a politician in America. I'm just looking at key sectors.
Exactly.
So, if I look at
so if you put $1 billion in America in some factory, you will put $100 million in robotics.
Exactly.
You don't want a mess of people around.
I would put money in a robotics fund, in an AI fund, in a technology fund.
That's right.
So I'm not setting up a factory there.
That's right.
So, which is why that's very different from somebody.
This is again another unintended consequence that. You may increase your GDP, you may increase productivity, but only on the capital side. The labor, which is where democracy resides, may not get their expectations may not get fulfilled in the manner they voted.
But to be honest, that is the paradox of the modern economy, where the efficiency of capital has really overshadowed the efficiency of labor. And but as I said. There are people who are caught between the old order and the new order, and they are actual people. They are real people. They are your cousins and my sister, and they are family members, and they are voters. They have anxieties, they have concerns, they have hopes, they have ambitions, they have desires, they have votes.
So this is going to be an uncertain. We'll have to watch how he negotiates this. Okay, deep state. There is this looming presence of what is known as deep state. There are conspiracies of deep state. There are actual actions of the deep state. And deep state has somewhat become partially a slogan and partially a silent driver of United States. How will Trump has also said that he's going to get rid of the deep state. How do you see that panning out? What is the deep state? Can it be removed?
I don't have a conspiratorial view of the deep state, that there's some secret intelligence agency somewhere and there's secret bureaucrats who run the country anyway. Yes, there is a bureaucracy. Yes, there are intelligence agencies which have a longer term view.
But equally large capitalists, techno capitalists.
Techno capitalists, or even all the companies who've been invested in China for 30 years.
That's right.
They don't immediately want to change their minds.
That's right.
I think the deep state changes from time to time, from period to period. The deep state becomes the repository of the embodiment of of a certain consensus, a certain comfortable consensus.
Democratic? Elitist?
Yeah, elitist of that time. You see, America saw one big change in its society in the 1930s under Roosevelt. And in a sense, from Roosevelt to Eisenhower's big investment in infrastructure to Johnson's social reforms and the building of a more equal society, with desegregation, that followed one chapter. Then came the 1980s and the Reagan period. And, Reagan was a Republican. Bill Clinton was a Democrat. Show me the difference. Bill Clinton went after a deficit, fulfilling Reagan's promises. Okay. Now, this is a 30, 40-year cycle which has run its course. There is a new cycle coming. I'm not suggesting Trump is the beginning of the cycle. He may be, he may not be. I don't know. But there is obviously a search for a new idea, for what is called the deep state today, perhaps is those elements, those institutions, whether in the state, whether in government, whether in business, whether in society, within the media, who became comfortable with the consensus of the last 40 years. Similarly, I suppose in 1971, to use a random example, there must have been a deep state which was comfortable with the ideas of the previous 30 years. So, deep state is not a static entity. Deep state also changes. I mean, the consensus in any society changes.
So what does Trump mean when he says that he's going to push the deep state out, etc.?
At one level,
is it rhetoric or is it?
At one level, it's excellent rhetoric that, I represent the real America. Washington is a broken capital. It's very effective. Okay, and he's in a sense conquered Washington as like nobody has in many perhaps since Reagan. His party has sway over both houses of Congress. It has sway over the White House. It has sway over the popular vote. The judiciary is more pro-Republican than previously. The big democratic institutions in the city, especially the media, are shaken.
Universities are
shaken. Think tanks, the liberal and pro-democrat leaning think tanks are shaken because their worldview has been rocked. But the fact is, he's also, at the same time, while conquering Washington or annexing Washington, call it what you will, he's also played on an increasing distrust between Washington and its systems and the American heartland. Now, he's promised to change that, to remove current institutions and their impulses and their biases as he sees them and replace them with something more transparent, more relevant, more fit for purpose.
Is it institutions or is it people? Some institutions can remain, it's just the approach or leadership that changes.
It's both. Institutions are shaped by people, people are shaped by institutions. It's both. So the new people who come in will shape those institutions in their image. But it is, to take a broader view, even if Trump completely succeeds in changing America for the next 20 or 30 years, in 2050 you may have somebody else, coming to the American people and saying,
what does the deep
this is a new deep state.
What is the in your speculations? I'm not even asking for precision or your analysis. How would you speculate that? What is Trump's deep state looking like?
I guess Trump's deep state would be those institutions that are more comfortable with a larger American commitment across various geographies, foreign policy commitment. And they are worried by the idea that America may retrench from some of its international commitments as a weakening of American national power. That could be their view. Trump has a different view. There are those institutions which believe that the deep investments made with China, business investments made in China, should not be easily jeopardized. Because many companies, you go to New York, you still have companies which have deep investments in China over 30 years. They don't want those jeopardized for good reasons. I'm not saying they're all unpatriotic or something. But it's easy to be anti-China if you have not a dollar in China. You have a more subtle and nuanced view if you have millions riding there. Okay? And of course, there are sections of the media which Trump sees as personal enemies. So when he means a deep state, I suppose he means that institutional consensus. But as I'm trying to say, the institutional consensus is always there. It keeps changing. If Trump is very successful in 20 years, he would have created a new deep state.
What's that deep state?
Well, it depends on those institutions in all these areas, business, foreign policy, strategic national thinking, which represent the Trump point of view. So, a deep state or an institutional consensus will always exist in a society, in a capital. It changes as ideas, popular appeal, democratic urges, society's urges
Here's a
change.
speculation. Maybe his new deep state will wear blue collars.
It will need to appeal more to blue collar.
That's right.
Yes.
It will be openly. It will be overtly anti-elite, but inside they may do whatever they want.
Again, this is not new in America. I mean, if you look at FDR, came from a very privileged background, like Trump, privileged New York family. But his New Deal spoke to the blue-collar worker. If you go back even earlier to Andrew Johnson, who is the first outsider in a sense, who not from the South, not from the landed gentry of Virginia or the old states, who comes to Washington and represents a new class in America. There was a deep state he also encountered. It was not called deep state back then. It was called old elite. But so it's part of democracy. It's you see it here as well.
Okay, so last question in this the first section, which is that what is the role of Elon Musk in this election? What is it likely to be over the next 4 years?
Well, he's obviously been a force multiplier for Trump, both in terms of the money he's put into the Trump campaign and also the energy he's put into the Trump campaign. It was a joke that, it almost seems like he's the super candidate because he seemed to be campaigning almost more than Trump at one point. There is talk of his companies benefiting, perhaps, but there is a line between being a businessman and being in government. There is a conflict of interest, which even Trump has not been able to completely efface and will not be able to. Second, there's a speculation that Musk may come into government.
Yes, he is. I mean, I think he's going to come and we'll come to that. He'll be cutting expenditure.
Yes, but does he come in an executive role or as an outside advisor? Because if he comes in an executive role, he'll have to move away from his companies. He can't be running his companies then. And running a company where you're the boss and you have majority control and running a government, even if the government and the bureaucracy would like to listen to you, it's not the same, believe me. So I think Trump will use Musk inside, outside, I'm not sure. But I don't think any of us has a finger on exactly how and what the role will be.
Minus Musk, do you think Trump would have won this election?
I think so, because it's in the end, if the momentum is with you, of course Musk helped, no question. But if the momentum was with Trump, and if you look at the mandate, the momentum was clearly with him. If Kamala Harris could not persuade enough people that she was a compelling candidate, I think he would have won anyway. But Musk certainly helped.
But imagine the old Twitter, where free speech was not available, and all you got was the narrative that mainstream media has been, and we have seen it in front of our eyes over the last few months. Don't you think Trump would be weakened greatly if Twitter wasn't in Elon Musk?
Well, Twitter certainly, but I would say it's beyond Twitter. It's more, I mean, Musk as Twitter helped. Musk as Musk, going out there, putting his money behind Trump campaign in orthodox ways and unorthodox ways helped. But I think you put your finger on something much larger. If this had been, again, 1972 or something, and whatever, with only 4 newspapers really mattering in the big cities, and Trump might not have won. It's easier to just go ahead with a mainstream candidate, whatever was the mainstream at that point. But we are living in an era of, frankly, information disintermediation and information anarchy, okay, which is bewildering and exciting at the same time. Okay? And it also means that nobody has a monopoly on the truth, frankly. And sometimes you wonder what the truth is. So this is a much more challenging communication environment. It also opens up much more opportunity. I mean, the combination of technology and the communication revolution have allowed, say, a Trump to become a national figure, to sustain being a national figure even when he lost elections in a period of 7 or 8 years, when 100 years ago it may have taken 20 years of traveling around the country to do that. So technology and the internet and digital platforms can fast forward and accelerate a political narrative. And Trump has used that very well.
Okay, so we now come to the second set of
Sure.
questions. This will be on geopolitics, security. So let's start with wars. There is a great expectation that, and Trump has said so, I will end the wars, etc. You think Russia-Ukraine war will end?
There's enormous fatigue with that war. Okay. There's fatigue in America. There's fatigue in Europe.
There's fatigue in Russia. I mean, even the fighters are fatigued.
Everyone is fatigued. Okay. And despite the public bluster in Europe, even Europeans are fatigued. So can you have some sort of arrangement where there are security and economic guarantees offered and a reconstruction package offered to Ukraine, and Putin retains some but not all the territory he claims, and the conflict does not get resolved? It's not that peace breaks out, but it becomes a frozen conflict. It gets postponed to another day. That would be a situation that is conceivable. It's not simple.
Does it need Trump to do this? This situation could have happened under any president.
True, but it needs somebody to persuade Zelensky, frankly. Because obviously he has a stake in a maximalist position in the war, as does Putin. Putin is the one, after all, who started this. Let's not forget that. I think the conversation will have to happen between the new American president and the Europeans, because I don't think Trump objects to Ukraine fighting the war or to American weapons going to Ukraine. He objects to the fact that America is paying for those weapons and the Europeans are not. If this is a European frontier, the Europeans need to share the burden disproportionately, in his opinion.
Which he mentioned in his previous term as well,
yes.
2% of GDP.
So he says, you want to defend Ukraine, go right ahead. But you pay for the weapons, not my taxpayer. I'm happy to give you the weapons and sell them to you. I don't think he's going to give Putin a simple, easy victory, nothing of that sort. He will bargain. He's a bargainer. He's a
deal maker.
He's a deal maker. So fine, if I'm giving you this deal which actually works to Putin's benefit, what will Putin give me in return? As in, not give me personally, but give America in return. And it will see hard negotiation. So also, there is a longer term sort of paradox emerging. Despite the fact that Putin and Trump have got along in the past, one of Trump's big motivations is going to be to advance the US fossil fuel economy, more gas production, more oil production. That's clearly going to happen. And he will be searching for new markets in Europe, perhaps in Asia, perhaps in India. So he will be competing at some point in his next 4 years, maybe in 2 years, maybe in 1 year, as soon as he can get those machines to start cranking up. He'll be competing with Russia for energy markets. So the Trump-Putin or Russia-America dynamic It's not a simple one.
But I think there's space for both in energy. It's
There
not.
is space
There
for
is no
both.
either or
No,
here.
no. There's space for
Like
both in energy.
Venezuela has been sidelined completely despite holding the largest
There's space
reserves.
for both in energy, but at least the European market for the near future is probably gone from the Russians, and the Americans would want to muscle their way in, which will set off. Will have a knock-on effect in other energy markets across the world, because suddenly there's a new source of energy which had been bottled up under the Democrats, which emerges. So
there could be a decrease in energy prices as a result.
yes, but
The shipping cost notwithstanding. I mean,
there will certainly be a decrease in energy prices. Of course, there will also be climate change concerns, but that's another matter.
Israel, Hamas, Hezbollah, Houthi, Iran.
Well,
There was a news that came. Houthis are stopping. That turned out to be fake news.
Hamas or Houthis? Hamas, okay.
No, Houthis.
Houthis.
And today there's a news of Hamas and Hezbollah saying that we want peace, etc. And I don't know if that's fake news or not. But nonetheless, it's all there. Somebody is, if it's true, it's nice. If it isn't, then somebody is stoking these flames. But how do you see that? Let's look beyond these.
So in October 2023, following the completely horrific terror attacks on Israeli civilians and citizens of Israel by Hamas, Israel was duty bound to respond, and it did. Okay? The response probably went on a little longer than many of us expected, but it was an effective response, and it has expanded and evolved. It has now become not so much a battle against Hamas or Hezbollah, but actually against Iran and its auxiliaries, its proxies, and the character of Iran's regional policy. Now, does it become a direct conflict for Iran? Does it not? That is the crucial question, and that will be the first decision on Trump's plate when he takes office on 20th Jan. A lot will depend on that. I'm not willing to guess which way he'll go. He's certainly not going to commit American troops. He's clear on that. But to what degree he backs Israel, if Israel wants to deepen its conflict with Iran, because American support will be required, political and logistical and military. The Middle East keeps drawing back America, even when America wants to walk away. Let's see what Trump decides. I'm not sure, to be honest. But that is the crucial question.
His bombastic statements are, I will end all wars. So, how will he do that? Again, is it rhetoric?
Well, I think the Ukraine-Russia war is perhaps easier to end and freeze into a conflict than
Israel-Hamas.
I would say Israel-Iran now, because it's more than just Hamas. Because Israel has regained a lot of strategic space in Lebanon. It's really pushed back against Iranian auxiliaries. Arab countries are not unhappy with that. So do you stop here? Do you go further ahead? It's a difficult choice. From an American perspective, American deep state perspective, okay, it's a difficult choice. So I don't know what Trump is thinking.
Why is it difficult? Nuclear? Iran's nuclear facilities?
As in, at one level, you don't want more war, you want to freeze the conflict.
Yeah.
Understandable. I don't want no more wars. At another level, if you can weaken Iran further, it's an abiding American dream since 1979.
But America keeps changing its mind.
True. So that's why we have a new president from 20th Jan or 21st Jan. He'll have to take that call. But it's going to be a very crucial call.
So 2025 is going to be the year with maximum focus on China's potential invasion of Taiwan. Now there are theories on both sides that it'll be an encirclement versus it'll be a full-on. How does Trump fit into all this?
I think China's likelihood of a full-fledged invasion of Taiwan was always small, has become smaller, in my opinion. I don't think they would want to risk a full-fledged invasion.
Why?
They don't know how Trump will respond. In what way? Military, non-military, whatever. So one of the things about Trump is he thrives in being seen as unpredictable. That's his big strength. In his mind, he may be completely predictable, but he thrives in this. Even his impression is unpredictable.
Read his mind. What is
It's very
Trump's mind today?
In keeping everybody around him guessing. I mean, that's what all great leaders do, to be honest. Okay.
No, but when there's action, when there is provocation, when there is a spark, then is he going to douse those fires, or is he going to stay back? This is not my problem.
Look,
Because again, let's come back to the Make America Great Again. Those semi-inward looking. Why this is not my problem? You deal with it, etc., etc.
No,
I think the only advantage of having Taiwan as a partner is semiconductors. But beyond that, it's just a geography.
it is a geography. But if China annexes territory in Asia, annexes Taiwan, it doesn't leave the geopolitics of Asia and the world unaffected. So, Make America Great Again is about building industrial capacities and building the economy in America. Yes. It is also about restoring American self-confidence as a world leader. Now, Trump doesn't want to send troops abroad to do that. But if he can achieve it without sending troops abroad, remember, he went after the Iranian general, Soleimani, at a time when nobody expected. And, people wondered, was this even needed at this point? But he did it. So he thrives in being unpredictable. And I think that would caution Beijing from making a move on Taiwan.
Also, politically, already there are conversations around, by the way, I disagree with it, that America is a declining power. I don't think America is a declining power. There are just that there are other powers that are gathering little of their own momentum, notably China, but possibly India, Japan. And this whole conversations and narrative around the US being a declining power would become sharper in case of non-involvement in Taiwan.
Oh, I would say not so much non-involvement, but if in the absence of a sharp response by America to a possible Chinese annexation, and I don't believe the annexation is happening. Don't get me wrong, I'm not. So, which is why I don't think China will make a military move on Taiwan immediately after Trump comes to office, certainly.
Okay, so we discussed this earlier, but now I want to go one level deeper. So, European Union, NATO, European security, 2% of GDP, military personnel, etc. This is the broad conversation in the European Union today, maybe in Europe. And Germany, for instance, it's looking at conscription, reintroducing conscription again. And some countries are paying their 2%, some are not.
Poland, I think, is.
Poland, that's right. Some of them are. And how do you see this entire... See, until yesterday, Europe was dependent on the US on Russia for gas, the US for security, and China for markets.
Cinderella moment.
Right? Now, Russia is out of the game. China, America is pushing to be out of the game. So now the continent, Europe, would be dependent on the US for gas, on the US for markets, and on the US for security.
Yeah,
How is this going to play out in that geography?
Sorry, I said Cinderella moment, I mean Goldilocks moment. I mean, it was the Goldilocks moment for Europe. Chinese market, American security, Russian gas. So it couldn't last. And Trump won them, to be honest. The last time he was president, he won them. They didn't take him seriously. America will certainly want to sell his gas under Trump to Europe. And I think he's going to push for that. He would also want to sell his weapons and help, like Biden did, help build manufacturing facilities in Europe. But he would want Europeans to pay for their security, which they have not been doing for decades now. And the de-risking, decoupling from China, frankly, you don't need to be Trump to tell the Europeans that. I mean, the Europeans should be seeing that.
Frankly, Europe as a continent doesn't seem to have any strategic sensitivity.
If they're not seeing it now, with what Chinese business partners, alleged business partners or competitors have done to iconic German companies, in a sense, hollow them out by tweaking, stealing, pilfering their technology.
And Germany amazes me. Sorry to, I'm going to pull this thread a bit. You mentioned Germany. Their top companies are investing more and more into China.
They're investing
what
more
the hell
in
is
China.
going on here?
And now,
how are they thinking? What are they smoking?
Now they call it in China for China.
Yeah.
Which means we manufacture in China for the Chinese market, not for the global market, and you're giving China even more leverage.
Yeah. So this is a dissonance. Their security report mentions German as well as the EU security reports. They look at China as an not adversary, as a what's that word?
Competitor, systemic competitor.
Yeah. And the companies are going all out and putting more and more their billions of dollars. What are their boards thinking?
So Europe, especially Germany, China runs a big deficit vis-a-vis the US. Frankly, so does Germany. Okay, so we keep manufacturing, we sell to the US buys from us, the Chinese buy from us, we'll invest in China. And when it comes to the Indians, we'll give them a lecture on how you must have an FTA, which we will not have very easily. And we will carry on. I think Europe has some serious thinking to do. Serious thinking.
Do you think the EU as a body has failed countries, its members? Because that democracy doesn't seem to be...
It doesn't think strategically. Some years ago, there was two European companies, Siemens and Alstom, I think, German and French, wanted to merge to produce a European champion, which would compete with, especially in the manufacture of trains, with the big Chinese companies. Because other Chinese companies were backed by state capital. So they said, we want to merge to create, this happened about 5-6 years ago. Okay? And the European competition laws said, no, you'll become too large and we won't allow you to. Now, who benefited in the end? The Chinese. And you have two big European companies, which if they had merged, could have produced something bigger. So yes, they are probably in violation of the letter of the competition law. But shouldn't the competition law also be changed to reflect new realities?
Particularly strategic realities.
Absolutely.
Now it's no longer train or teddy bears or fountain pens, etc.
Trains have consequences beyond just transporting people.
That's right.
So there is the bureaucracy in Brussels is it's a very fine bureaucracy, but it doesn't have strategic bone in its mind.
Look at AI. They have regulated AI out of the continent.
Not just AI. Look at the big digital platforms. They are Chinese platforms behind their walled garden. They are, of course, American platforms. India is trying to build some platforms. Okay. Where are the European platforms? They're just absent. They're not there.
And had it not been for Australia, India, and then America banning Huawei from their 5G networks, Europe was already there. And in fact, Germany still hasn't said no to Germany and France, the two biggest economies. They still haven't said explicit no.
Not just
smaller
Huawei.
Countries have.
If you look at electric vehicles, okay, electric vehicles are massive data collectors. So if you drive an electric vehicle in here, it will just soak in data from everywhere. Okay. Now, the Europeans have given Chinese electric vehicle manufacturers, including BYD, famously, and if you go to any major European city, which I'm sure you do, the biggest, most attractive showroom is almost certain to be BYD. They've given them a free run. We haven't. We don't have great electric vehicles in this country today.
Even if you do, where are the roads?
Well, no, that's true, but they'll come up at some time, hopefully, Tatas and Mahindras, or maybe other companies will also invest here. But there is a strategic risk to such supply chain dependencies and data vulnerabilities vis-a-vis Chinese electric vehicles. Because every electric vehicle uses tens of thousands of modules, which are the lower end of the semiconductor chain. Into these modules, you can embed SIM cards, which for the life cycle of the product, transmit data back to source. And this has been happening with electric vehicles. In the UK, they found vehicles being used by ministers transmitting data back to China. So it's not something I'm manufacturing. It's not paranoia. It's well known. But
so
the
here is a
Europeans have just walked
continent
into
that
it.
has zero strategic approach, engaging with a country that is completely strategic.
China.
Yeah, which and has weaponized. It has strategicized everything from its economy to trade to products.
So if Trump's shock therapy ends up waking up Europe, I think
Might be a good thing.
it might be a good thing, and in 30 years from now, they may actually give him an award.
In the meantime, their local politics will create problems because any such expenditure going, for instance, the German government has fallen, and that is mainly around the budget and
Yes.
how do you fix those numbers,
How do you
which
spend the
probably
money?
means even more taxation or cutting back on certain expenditures or welfare measures. We don't know how this will play out, but this another 2% burden combined with return from China or let's say few steps back from China is going to cost the continent a lot. They have trapped themselves. I think this is a continent to watch alongside.
It's a great continent to go to for a holiday.
That's right.
Remarkable. It's a lovely place.
Yeah.
But strategically, it's a retired continent.
Okay, so Indian Ocean region and the Quad. How is what is going? Is there going to be a continuity? My sense is there will be. I'd like to hear your views, but here is mine, which is that we are two large democracies, and we have come together after decades of tensions, decades of suspicion at a G to G level. At a P to P, person to person, we've been doing well. At a B to B, we've been doing well. At a G to G, we are getting closer. Do you think Trump, what is going to be Trump's strategy in the Indian Ocean region and Quad? Is it going to be different? Is the direction going to be same but specifics different? Or do you think there is a change coming here?
So I'll answer that question in two ways. One is what Trump could be thinking. Let me try and second guess him. And second, what India would want. Okay. First, in terms of the Quad, remember Trump revitalized the Quad. The first meeting of Quad foreign ministers took place in 2019 in September in New York. Trump was president, Prime Minister Modi was Prime Minister here, and they will both be in office next year when the Quad summit hopefully takes place in India. Their Japanese and Australian equivalents would have changed. As in, those who were there in 2019 are not going to be there today or are not there today. So, in a sense, Trump would look at the Quad as something he started and then, of course, the Biden administration built on it. Second, when he looks at the Quad, he sees it as a collective which is working in Indo-Pacific, offering options to China, and is certainly displeasing China. Each time the Quad leaders meet, the Chinese bristle. Okay. Third, he is concerned about free riders, what he calls free riders, that alliance partners or simply friends. India is not an alliance partner, but it's a friend. It's a strategic partner. He's concerned about countries treating America as a security provider with the American taxpayer paying. Now, yes, Australia and Japan are treaty partners, but they have taken enormous steps in the past few years to enhance military capacities. AUKUS being the Australian example, Australia is paying for submarines. In Japan, following Trump's nudge or urging, the Japanese defense budget has gone up. And India, of course, does not depend on US security. It buys weapons from the US when it has to. It pays for them. It wants co-production arrangements which will actually help both countries and perhaps lead to markets in third countries for Indo-American products, which is all starting to happen. And of course, it does not require American troops to come and defend India. India is very capable of doing it ourselves. So I would imagine when he looks at the world, he probably sees the Quad as a net positive. Coming to the Indian Ocean region and I'll say broader South Asia, in fact, there's a conversation on the Indian Ocean between the Indian and US systems even next week under the outgoing Biden administration. Certainly, India would want it to continue. But if India and the US are partners, then there has to be alignment, broad strategic alignment. There could be disagreements, but there has to be broad strategic alignment on their neighborhoods. So when India does stuff in, say, South America, and the Indian foreign minister has visited South America several times in the last few years. So he's visited it more than any predecessor. When India makes investments in South America, when India makes political moves in South America, it does not do it at the cost of America, of the United States. It's aligned with the US's broad strategic goals because the US is a friend. When the US does things in South Asia or in the Indian Ocean region, it needs to align with India. Not everyone in the American system gets that, as we've seen in recent times. Now, you could say that those are elements of the deep state. Maybe they are. You could say they are institutions that are India skeptic or individuals are India skeptic. That is also true. I don't want to go into one definition or the other. Names don't matter. But that is something India would obviously like Trump to fix as part of his institutional revitalization of Washington. That if India is a friend, then you need to be aligned with India in India's neighborhood. There could be some differences. That's fine. I understand. But broadly, don't work with our interest in mind.
Yeah. China and Russia we have discussed. Bangladesh, very strangely and out of the blue, and perhaps it was to get the Hindu vote in America, he came out very strongly against the killings of Hindus in Bangladesh. You think he's going to follow that up with some more pressure? Not that Yunus is a great friend of his.
So, look, obviously his statement might have been motivated by, like any politician in election, on the eve of an election, he's looking at votes. He might have said that because of that. He might have said that because Yunus is so clearly aligned with the Democrats. That's true. But to follow up to my last answer, there is a broader point here. If India and the US are to be partners, and are to be trusted partners, then broadly we need to be aligned on each other's neighborhoods. Frankly, institutions in the US system are not aligned with India on Bangladesh. They have, I'm not saying they've created it, but they've certainly advanced a situation in Bangladesh which is bewildering and which is causing problems for India. About 2 weeks ago, you had Chinese ships visiting Chittagong, from Chittagong, I think, if I'm mistaken. Now, if the US has such influence on the government, the caretaker government or the interim government in Bangladesh, which it does, it is the most influential country there, why isn't it telling its friends there, including Professor Yunus, that you can't have Chinese ships visiting? So who are you strengthening?
So could it be that Bangladesh is veering towards China as an alternative? It is seeing the writing on the wall.
I think Bangladesh is very confused right now. There are many institutions, many political actors who are pulling in different directions. There is Professor Yunus who thinks you can control the country but can't because he's never run a government. There is the army watching from the background, but the army in Bangladesh is not like the army in Pakistan. It's not that powerful or institutionally.
But army is also killing Hindus now. That's like yesterday's news that just came.
There is obviously religious violence and political violence, both. Okay? There are students who think they have achieved a revolution, probably can't run a government or can't run a college canteen. But who did it?
Is Bangladesh going to become the next Lebanon?
There is the BNP, which would want an election. There is the Jamaat, which is growing. Okay, Pakistan is smelling a chance. China is smelling a chance. The Americans think they have things under control. They don't. Could it become the next Lebanon? I certainly hope not, because Lebanon was far away for India. Bangladesh is next door, and remember Myanmar, which is next to Bangladesh, is unstable itself. So this is our neighborhood. It's easy for Washington or someone in Washington to sit back and say, let things play themselves out in Bangladesh. But it affects us deeply. And that is the understanding you expect of trusted friends. That understanding in the past few months in terms of Bangladesh has simply not been there. And that has disappointed the Indian system. And actually not just disappointed, angered the Indian system.
Will Trump change that? Will he bring it back?
I think he needs to, the hope, I don't know what he'll do, but the hope here certainly would be that he would see India's point of view, and not just for India's sake. If Islamist radicals gain ascendancy in Bangladesh, it doesn't help India, but it doesn't help Bangladesh, it doesn't help the world. If China gains disproportionate influence in Bangladesh and manages to send a regular fleet of ships there, how does it help anybody? How does it help Trump? How does it help America? How does it help India?
Okay, so last on this, not really security issue, but Canada. How do you think Trump is going to handle Trudeau? He's behaved in a very imbecile manner recently.
So look, there's a Trudeau-Trump dynamic, which has nothing to do with India. And I don't think the two of them get along as individuals. Okay, there is the US-Canada dynamic. The two countries are very close, and institutionally very, very close. Trudeau has behaved in a very immature manner. A murder took place in his country. Every right to get the murder investigated. If the murder leads to some person in India, by all means investigate it. No question, punish people. But since when does a routine murder investigation merit a prime ministerial press conference? Forget everything else. Forget the fact that Trudeau has flirted with all sorts of extremist elements in his for vote bank politics, as the foreign minister called it, as Mr. Jaishankar called it. Forget all of that. This been a murder. Investigate the murder. Let law enforcement investigate the murder. If you have questions of the Indian system, say that, look, we've got this evidence. Can you corroborate it? Understandable. That happens all the time. When does a murder investigation merit a prime ministerial press conference? And a series of them. Obviously, you are doing this for political purpose, not because you are concerned about one person being murdered. And the trust between Trudeau and India, and not just the trust between Trudeau and India, the trust between Trudeau and many of his partners who would have said that on the basis of some but little evidence, some intelligence inputs, whatever they may mean, he has gone public to such a degree, started naming his system, started naming
Home
Minister, senior individuals here. Now, okay, if you think my Home Minister had done this, give me evidence. You can't just say, no, he's done it and I offer no evidence. I mean, it's a matter of, any country would react very strongly, and India has.
No, so how do you think Trump coming is Trump going to be a deal maker between Trudeau and Modi, or
no, I certainly hope not.
Canada and India?
I certainly hope not. I don't think India wants Trump to be a deal maker. We will deal with Trudeau ourselves. Trudeau has walked himself and his country.
Will he lean towards Trudeau, or will he lean towards processes? Let's say diplomatic processes.
Look, if there is a process where the two countries or the three countries are collaborating in trying to find whether a certain crime has been committed or not committed, that is perfectly fine. But that is not done at the level of prime ministers and presidents. Prime Minister Modi does not investigate a murder. President Trump will not investigate a murder. Prime Minister Trudeau should not investigate a murder. It's a job of law enforcement. Let them collaborate and do it. In terms of Trudeau using what is a very sensitive international matter for his domestic politics, I certainly hope Trump does not give him sympathy.
See, getting Trump on his side would legitimize his stance.
What stance?
That whatever India has done and whatever allegations that he's making.
No, but if he has said that, or his system has said, not him directly, but his ministers have said that, this individual in India was responsible, the senior people have been mentioned. Please provide evidence. If you don't provide evidence, you expect us to sit back and just listen. Trump or no Trump, India has to stand up.
And India is.
Oh, absolutely, we will. And this is what has happened with Canada is not a BJP government. It is a national resolve. Please look at the response of parties across the system. There is a national resolve. We all know what the Khalistan movement did to India in the and to Punjab. I'm a Punjabi. And what it did to us in the 1980s. When I'm a Punjabi with 6 in the immediate family. All of us have felt the pain, and many families have felt it much more than my family has. Okay. So we know what this means. We know there are perfectly good people of Indian origin in Canada. Hindus, Sikhs, Muslims, other communities. There are also some pretty dodgy elements. We see them. And if you don't want to act against them, if you start blaming us for them and trying to guilt trip the Indian system will not take it lightly. So Trump or no, that has nothing to do with Trump.
Let me rephrase this. Do you think under the Trump administration, there will be a greater pressure on India from Canada with greater support to Canada?
I don't want to second guess that. It's easy for me to say Trump will not sympathize with Trudeau individually, but there are systems in place. There is obviously a systemic collaboration between law enforcement or agencies in Canada and agencies in America.
But that deal has been broken by Trudeau. That is behind us now.
No.
Now it's a new narrative for, or I don't know how to even define this stupidity. But it's...
Look, there are legal processes that have begun in America. There are political... There's a politicized investigation in Canada. Okay? I don't think India can compromise on either, beyond a point. If there is evidence offered, of course we can collaborate. But when you make it political, there is no question of a compromise. It's a matter of national dignity and honor. So whether Trump is president of the United States or Obama is president or Biden is president is irrelevant. There are some matters we have to deal with ourselves.
Okay, so I was, I fool around with mathematics. I was drawing Venn diagrams on geopolitical Venn diagrams. And I thought that one circle is the India-Russia relationship. It's okay. Will Trump have a problem with that? I'll pull the full course in the next few questions. You will see the whole Venn diagram.
So look, if Trump wants to talk to Putin, he can do it directly, of course. But Prime Minister Modi is one of the few leaders who's managed to go to Ukraine and Russia. Many countries, leaders of many countries have told the Indian government and the Indian Foreign Ministry, Indian Prime Minister, Foreign Minister, that in a sense, the fact that you have a line open to the Russians and you communicate with both. Remember, India sent an ambassador to Ukraine in the middle of the war, a new ambassador, presented credentials to Zelensky in the middle of battle, metaphorically, not literally. So, India has maintained relations with both. It has a line open to Putin as well. It can communicate, it can carry messages. So, yes, Putin Trump can pick up the phone and talk to either person. But the fact that India has the ability to build a larger consensus is something that will not be lost on him. If there is a move towards freezing the conflict, I'm not saying bringing about lasting peace, but freezing the conflict, India will be useful to him, to his endeavors.
So India-Russia relationship is the way it is. It's a good relationship. US-Russia relationship is a dilly-dallying sort of a relationship. And when you see these two together, the intersections are fewer. How do you see that coming out?
Look, Russia is the US's traditional adversary. China is the emerging adversary. There are still people in the US system who prefer to obsess with Russia and don't give enough attention to the China threat or challenge.
We've been saying this for years now.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
In every European delegation that comes, and you've also been in several, the only thing I say is that, they give Russian oil, Russian gas, it's all the same boring, ridiculous rhetoric. So when I say the following words, that's when they begin to think, which is what Russia is to EU, China is to India.
You're completely right. If you look at, the Eurasian heartland, which begins on the eastern frontiers of Europe and ends just west of India. It's a large, very exotic, historically and culturally rich heartland. It's defined human history for centuries, okay, before the age of shipping, transcontinental shipping. Russia is a challenge on the western end of that heartland, okay, to Europe. On the eastern end, Russia is actually not that much of a challenge. Russia is sometimes the more useful partner, because the real challenge here is China and religious radicalism, which comes up in Pakistan, Afghanistan, Central Asia.
Bangladesh.
Now
Bangladesh.
Bangladesh, well, it's to our east, but I'm talking about countries to our west, ending with Afghanistan, Pakistan. So, foreign policy or strategic choices are determined by politics, but they're also determined by geography. If India was located where Poland is located, India would look at Russia differently. If Poland was located where India is located, it would look at China differently, okay, and look at Russia differently. So you have to understand.
That's the geo in geopolitics.
Absolutely. That's the geo in geopolitics. In fact, the heartland is the root of geopolitics.
Okay, India-US relationship is healing, strengthening, and I think Trump will power it. There may be differences of opinion here and there, but I think, and I think you agree with that, right?
Absolutely. Look, with the US, we do simply so much. Okay, politically, militarily, economically, technologically.
People to people.
Yeah, people to people. In terms of innovation, we do simply so much. Frankly, as we move towards cleaner energy, and India is committed to that path, even if in the 4-year term of Trump, we will end up doing a lot of work with the US, perhaps not with the federal government, perhaps with other institutions, state governments, state administrations, universities, private companies, on clean energy. So India and the US simply do so much that we will intersect with any president's priorities, and yet also work with other institutions in that country which have priorities different from that of the president. So that goes without saying.
Now, US-China is not okay. India-China is not okay. And I think these two not okays are, will there be a binding element of the two working together? For instance, in Quad, but beyond the Quad?
Well, India is certainly looking to partner the US and other like-minded countries to build not just a military hedge against China, because India is quite capable of doing that, of course, with some support in terms of hardware, with some purchases, with some co-production. But more than that, in terms of technology and supply chains, that is where the real battle now lies.
Critical minerals.
Critical minerals, cyber security. What's my big concern? Is it that my country will be nuked tomorrow morning, or is it that there will be an attack on the stock market computer systems? Hospitals. Or imagine tomorrow morning, the Mumbai Stock Exchange and the NSE are attacked in the morning, okay, by a cyber attack. It could be more crippling than, it's more, I won't say more crippling, it's very crippling, and it's more proximate than the likelihood of a nuclear attack. So cyber security is one area where we need to work together. We can both contribute to each other. India with its skilled people, India with its capacities, the US with even greater capacities. So technology and supply chains is really the currency of national security today. More than, I would say,
and Trump understands this.
In his first term, he was beginning to.
So he did make some good deals. There was a weapons.
To be fair, the Biden administration also understood it.
Yes.
And the Biden administration built on what Trump had done. We hope, we as Indians hope that Trump too builds on what Biden did, because these are goals that are in both our national interest, irrespective of who's in office.
I was going to ask you about EU, but EU is like Bangladesh, confused.
That's a separate. We'll have a separate conversation.
Yeah, that's a separate conversation. Okay, so now I come to the third part of our discussion. So There is a regulatory rethink. I think we discussed this earlier, that the entire regulatory structure, which has become almost like that of Europe, is on the cards. And I think Elon Musk is going to be leading that regulatory changes. He himself has been a victim of hyper-regulation, not only over-regulation, hyper. He calls it lawfare. And in case America is able to redesign its regulatory structure, that is also in tune with Make America Great, bring manufacturing, and so on and so forth. You think there'll be any compromises here? Because regulation generally is done keeping certain, for instance, pollution, so keeping the air clean, or protecting labor, or women, etc. So do you think this easing of regulation in a country which is known for enterprise is going to compromise on other aspects?
Look, it's difficult to say because there are some areas in America which actually need more regulation, if you ask me.
Such as?
I certainly think as big tech companies will need more regulation. There are other areas which might need lower regulation. There's also a lot of regulation, especially in some of the areas you spoke about, environment, which is in the hands of local administrations, state governments, or even municipal and city governments. So to expect that there can be a wholesale transformation at the level of the federal government, and which will change everything all over the country, is very unrealistic. Having said that, I'd like to see what Trump and Musk, if indeed Musk joins the government, actually prioritize. Because you can change some things, you can't change everything. The things you can change are the things you start with when your political capital is at its highest. So I'd like to see what they prioritize.
And I think there is an echo of it already happening in India. In fact, I think India began it with the Jan Vishwas bill, which turned out to be just a framework. I mean, there are, right? There are 26,134 imprisonment clauses before doing business, and the Jan Vishwas bill, Jan Vishwas Act, Amendment Act, which came last year, it decriminalized just 113 of those. And even if you look at the union government, there is 5,100 in the hands of the union government. So I'm hoping, certainly for India and India's entrepreneurs, that this gets rationalized in Jan Vishwas too. And Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman ji also mentioned it in the budget. So we are waiting. Let's see how that plays out. But I think this entire hyper-regulation is over. That story is over. I think at some point, EU will have to follow this. People are fed up with this hyper-regulation. And I think if America begins it, it already has that advantage, which will nudge other countries to work faster.
Well, certainly, I mean, regulatory cholesterol, as my friend Manish Sabarwal has often put, you know him well as well, is a problem in many societies and many countries. I would still argue, less of a problem in America than it is in India or Europe.
And if America is doing this, so imagine what kind of it'll.
I suppose Trump's initial push would be towards greater liberalization for the fossil fuel sector, which is also a big job creator. So now, as I said, any government can push a lot in its initial days, but it can't keep pushing for 4 years. So let's see what he prioritizes.
Tariffs. This is very important for EU, for China, and certainly for India. In fact, Trump in his rhetoric, in his run-up, has said that, or was it as president in the past, said that India is a tariff abuser, and he's looking at raising tariffs. So how do you think that story is going to play out?
Look, obviously the primary target is going to be China, and to some degree countries such as Germany. But India will not be unaffected. There will be tariffs probably coming our way as well. In some areas, there is room for compromise, and we also will probably need to show flexibility depending on the political understanding. Do remember that what is key for India is to preserve its technology partnership, which straddles both civilian and military spaces, with the US, which has been built under successive governments and administrations, and took a big leap under the Modi-Biden administrations in the past 4 years. ISET being one emblem of that. India would want to preserve that and not jeopardize it because of the transition in the US. If preserving that means showing some flexibility in terms of tariffs we also impose on in areas where we can show some compromise, it might lead to an actual deal. I'm not calling it a free trade agreement, that's too ambitious, but some sort of a mini trade package. It was negotiated in the 4 years that Trump was in office between 2016 and 2020, especially after 2017. Unfortunately, negotiation became an end in itself for both systems. This time, I hope the negotiation leads to some sort of a deal, because it's entirely in our interest. It's in America's interest as well, but it's in our interest as well to demonstrate that we can do it.
Yeah, but I wonder why we are so afraid. We have talent. We have no dearth of capital today. So why can't Indian business compete with American business?
In some areas we can. In some areas, they didn't stop pushing the last time. Lighthizer, when Lighthizer was the USTR. In some places we don't know how to close a deal. So I won't blame any one side, but the political and strategic imperative to close a deal this time is much higher.
See, when reforms were happening, and you have captured it in your book as well, there was that Bombay Club, okay? And they had a point, by the way. You can laugh at them, but they had a point. Because, 44 years of doing business in a certain way, and overnight you are suggesting that let the global giants walk in and with all their capital, with all their distribution, with all their products, global brands, and you want us to compete with them. Of course, they lost because they didn't have a political constituency.
To go back to a phrase we used earlier, the Bombay Club represented the consensus of that age. So in a sense, it was the deep state.
Yeah.
So you need to use deep state in a expansive context.
But having said that, so in that debate, politically, Rahul Bajaj lost, but Bajaj Auto won.
Absolutely.
Okay, and likewise, the whole Indian structure of doing business changed after liberalization. I think efficiency in tariffs will also probably get Indian businesses smarter, more efficient. In all, competition does that, and we have seen it in, for instance, look at the way Jio came, and it just the prices went rock bottom, and suddenly the entire industry has expanded.
Well, look, yes and no. I mean, I wouldn't say reducing tariffs across the board will be beneficial. It can cause problems, and depending on who you reduce the tariffs for, and which sectors and products you're dealing with. Because I would certainly not advocate this strategy for China. We would suffer. And the Chinese would weaponize it and game the system, which they have. But with the US in certain areas, they can be a workable deal.
They may want agricultural tariffs to go.
Again,
they may want auto, like last time the whole debate was around Harley Davidson.
So Harley Davidson's is an easy give if you ask me, because hardly any Indians will buy Harley.
Yeah.
Certain product categories in agriculture, yes.
Even in agriculture?
Certain product categories. I mean, Californian almonds are available here now. But, so it's certain product categories, yes, certain
so it'll have to be a product by product.
It will have to be very carefully negotiated. And, it's going to be I call such deals FTAs, not free trade agreements, but feasible trade agreements. And every relationship has its own feasibility stress tests.
You see this happening.
But especially in data, to some degree, e-commerce, AI, there is room for compromise.
Now, there are going to be unexpected consequences for tariffs. Because if Trump raises tariffs, inflation will rise in America. There already, inflation is not high, but it's higher than what it used to be. Inflation rises, then interest rates are going to not fall, if not rise. And the entire economic structure is going to get impacted. Until these elections happened, the discussion was in February or January, Fed will cut interest rates, and then across the board, it will happen across the world. In case of this tariff war begins and it is placed, and therefore what you are suggesting is that consumers should pay higher prices to protect the political economy, then this whole inflation and interest rates is going to hit you in the face, between the eyes. How do you think Trump is going to play that?
Well, there are two theories. One is that he is escalating to de-escalate.
Which you mentioned earlier also.
Yes. And the second is he's going to probably look at tariffs in certain areas. So there's no point increasing tariffs on bicycles. I'm just guessing. Using bicycles or bicycles for children. There's less point doing that than for
electric vehicles.
Exactly. So, or for something of a more strategic value, strategic and economic value.
So, an economic equilibrium based on strategic equilibrium can happen around tariff plays
with greater balance in deficits. The current imbalance in the deficit needs to be checked. He needs to do that politically. He has to show that. And also, I think the broader approach of diversifying from just Chinese imports to a wider spectrum will continue.
Okay. The one area which has seen a sharp spike after Trump won the elections is cryptocurrencies. They have increased by 10 to 15% across the board, and some have doubled and others. So you think and he has expressed his proclivity towards getting cryptos in some form. Now, yeah, it's a cool thing. It's very convenient. It bypasses the high cost of traditional banking. But it's also extremely vulnerable to cyber attacks. It's vulnerable to all kinds of technological intrusions. How do you think this is going to play out? You think he will go ahead? Because if he does, then across the board, the world will have to follow.
Look, crypto is not without its excitement or its concerns. It's existed in a regulatory haze in the US and frankly in India even more so, where there are genuine concerns in the government about its misuse for money laundering by criminal actors and so on. Having said that, the technology behind crypto, the whole idea of crypto is innovative and exciting. And there is a lot of innovation outside of crypto riding on the same technology on blockchain. Some of it is fueled by Indian innovators who are now moving to other countries, including the Gulf, and working there.
So I understand where you're coming from, but the risk that you're mentioning is more of the speculative nature that you're buying thin air, you're buying hot air.
Yeah,
but when it is legitimized as a currency, it becomes a different game altogether.
So I think we are at a pivotal moment in the evolution of crypto with this election. And in the next 4 years, we may see a much greater mainstreaming of crypto, in my opinion. The crypto industry backed Trump in a massive way. Its investment in the US election, by some reckoning, was $100 million. It has crypto-backed PACs have supported candidates who've been elected to the Senate and the Congress. So in addition to supporting Trump, Trump will have to appoint a new chair of the SEC. The outgoing chair has been a crypto skeptic. I expect the new one will be more imaginative and supportive because that will be his or her political mandate. Indian society is adopting crypto much faster than we imagine.
Society or some speculators within the society, the loud speculators?
Fair enough, but they're also part of society.
They're insignificant.
I agree, but the value is not insignificant now. What I'm trying to say is, I have no crypto investments, zero. But crypto is becoming a reality. And we need to move it from the regulatory no man's land it is in currently to something different. What that different is, I don't know. It's going to be a negotiation and a give and take. But I think Trump's election has perhaps moved the needle on crypto somewhat.
And it's going to happen over the next 4 years. He's going to push this further.
I think the crypto story will be different in the next 4 years than it is today. Now, how different? How much more mainstream? I don't know.
We'll revisit that with another conversation.
In 4 years.
4 years. Okay, so there is because of the way, it has been accelerated because of this, but the manner in which Russia has been thrown out of SWIFT because of a war has made countries feel vulnerable to the SWIFT system, which is dominated by the West. An alternative to the dollar, an alternative payment system, these are the new conversations. BRICS is coming out with, or is planning to come out with an alternative. Not that they are easy to make or credible, that they will remain credible, or even politically, like nobody's going to trust a Chinese yuan based system. But Trump has gone on to say that those who shift away will be dealt with in a certain manner. And yet, a country like India cannot be vulnerable to being thrown out of an international payment system. What they have done with Russia, irrespective of what Russia did, is a breach of institutional integrity. I'm not justifying Russia, by the way. I'm talking about what is being labeled as a rule of law. This is a major breach. You are cancelling an entire nation through these actions. Now, how do you see this? Is Trump going to push hard on this or not?
Look, I don't know what the systemic thinking in Trump's camp is on this. But what the situation you described after the Ukraine war, after Russia's unilateral and egregious invasion of Ukraine, I have no question that Russia started it. But you're quite right. If you talk about the rules-based order, the way Russia was just cancelled, raised concerns even in India that what might happen if we have a similar infraction, not a war, or with the West. Okay. Now, I'm not saying this is a likely situation, it's perhaps unrealistic, but the very fact that people ask these questions means that those questions need to be answered or responded to adequately.
It's a strategic, economic strategic readiness, I would say.
So resilience or options, people always want options. Now, is non-dollar trade in a significant measure possible? I don't think so. Though, to some degree, some currencies, euro,
we had a ruble trade with Russia when we were small, tiny country.
But the euro as an alternative, the AED, the UAE currency as an alternative, they have emerged, but the dollar remains king and will remain king. Though, of course, in recent times, if you don't hold dollars, you'll be well advised to hold gold. Last year, gold has shot up because we live in volatile times. And so people do hedge. Individuals hedge. Countries also hedge. People have been looking for an option to switch to SWIFT. Okay? Not to leave SWIFT, but just have a second option. It's difficult to build. It's difficult to build in terms of a network, and also in terms of a cybersecurity arrangement. But if the US does not want others to even think on those lines, rather than be admonitory, it needs to be persuasive. And that is true irrespective of whether Biden is president or Trump. If people have concerns, you don't shout at them. You talk to them.
Yeah, and I think in a pragmatic manner, I don't think such a repeat will ever happen. But yet, the fact that it had happened, the fact that it's even on the table, makes me, as an Indian, uncertain about how it could play out for our country.
In February 2020, March 2020, when the war broke out, Sri Lanka had just started bringing back tourists. It had one of the longest tourist embargoes, unlike, say, the Maldives, which opened up to tourists, which opened up a window for tourists. Sri Lanka had a very long embargo because it was concerned about tourists coming in during COVID and spreading the virus. They opened up in February, March 2020, or maybe Jan 2020, around that time. They got an influx of tourists from Russia, from Ukraine, interestingly, and from India. Those were the first three groups. You had Russian tourists, normal Russian tourists, sitting in Sri Lanka in hotels, and suddenly, one fine morning, their cars stopped working. And flights were disrupted. So, and rather than becoming revenue earners for Sri Lanka had to feed them. Now, did you really need to do that to punish Putin for his war? Because you ended up punishing Sri Lanka. And it led to a economic crisis. It contributed to an economic crisis in Sri Lanka, which led to something, led to violence a few months down the line. I'm not saying that was the only factor that caused that violence, but it had a knock-on effect. So when you take such decisions, you need to think them through in a globalized world.
Okay, last two parts. One is this, the manner in which the US mainstream media has behaved. It has always been aligned, but this time it was to levels that were, I found personally, ridiculous. The fact that Washington Post was being told that you can no longer endorse a candidate, and there was a humongous hue and cry. It breaches all principles of journalism that I know of and which you have also lived in. Neutrality, or at least a pretense, or maybe even a sheen of neutrality is the reason why people come to media. That creates credibility. And here we have mainstream media which is so openly incredible, or what's that word, non-credible, incredibly non-credible, that I don't know why New York Times, Washington Post is taken seriously across the world.
Well, the fact is, they are the biggest newspaper titles in the world's richest country. So,
despite being knowingly, openly being non-neutral?
Not just
what's wrong with us?
See, you can be non-neutral. That's fine. I mean, the Daily Telegraph is non-neutral. The Guardian is non-neutral. You can be non-neutral. That's fine. They have a position. But you need to be informed. If you, in the weeks before the election, if you're going on and on about how Iowa is going to be won by Harris, and therefore the heartland, the American Midwest, which was Trump's strongest area, supposedly, is vulnerable. It didn't turn out to be true. But more than that, it showed that as newspapers, as journalists, you didn't know what was happening in your own country. Forget who you want. You might want Harris to win. That's fine.
It's like those exit polls.
But actually,
in India.
You had no idea what was happening in your own country. So if you have no idea what's happening in your own country, how can you send me a report in India on a situation in Vietnam and expect me to take it seriously? I'm going to say this newspaper doesn't understand its own country. It was telling me that Iowa and the Midwest were vulnerable for Trump and were likely to go to Harris. So if it tells me something about Vietnam, I'm using Vietnam as an example here, why should I believe it? I said, they don't understand their own country. How do they understand the second one? There is a credibility crisis. It's not just who you support. As a journalist, you can have a right to support anybody.
In the opinions, but not in your reportage.
Absolutely.
You can support as an opinion, and you have that right.
The whole idea of a newspaper endorsing a candidate, I've always found strange. Individuals endorsing a candidate is fine.
That's okay.
A signed column, you endorse a candidate, no problem.
Yeah.
But a whole newspaper endorsing a candidate, I think what Jeff Bezos said was very commonsensical.
I mean, it's authoritarianism within what you call yourself as the fourth pillar of democracy.
What's also happened to media generally, in the last few years is that, or last 2 decades, I would say, is that quite honestly, the business model of media, and this is not just a US problem, this is an Indian problem as well. The business model of media has collapsed. People, if you look at the big advertisers, they now have multiple platforms, including direct to customer platforms. They don't necessarily use newspapers or news channels. If you look at consumers, they have access to so much free information, it may not be worth their while to actually pay for information. Okay? So all of this has told on the business model of journalism. And when at the balance that could be maintained between opinion writers or opinion sections of a media outlet and reportage, which in a sense performed a leavening process by bringing reality from the ground, even reality they may not agree with. That balance has been lost, and it's been replaced by more and more opinion. Opinion in newspapers.
It's propaganda. Look at the headlines. Trump captures White House. What sort of a headline is that?
I understand. The opinion in newspapers, also opinion at, on 9 p.m. to TV shows or the equivalent.
I mean, this is a report. This is your headline.
So, no, I agree. But so there is a broader crisis of credibility for the media, not just liberal media. I mean, it's there for the right-wing media also. Let's not run away from that. I'll give you one example. I had some months ago, before the elections here, I had a group of private equity and fund managers from Singapore coming to India, of many countries actually. This person I spoke to was a Singaporean. And he asked me about a particular political policy situation in India. I don't want to go into details. And I gave him a nuanced answer, which was glass half empty, glass half full, which was the reality. He heard me out. He said, that's a very sensible answer. Thank you. He says, I've been trying to follow this issue in your media. And half your media tells me India's civil war situation. Half your media tells me India is already a superpower. Okay. I've been coming to India for many years. There was a time when a scan of the Indian media, it's like a scan of media in Indian democracy, gave me a fair idea with some biases about where India was. Today, I'm unable to make that determination.
Ask them to read Observer Research Foundation pieces.
So, well, the point is, it's because the media is facing this credibility crisis that at the think tank level, an ORF is relevant, or at a strategic consultancy level, the Asia Group is relevant. Because people look for credible information or credible insight. If it's not provided in the media, they look elsewhere. Frankly, if the media was perfect, you would not need an ORF or an Asia Group at one level. I mean, Asia Group still does other stuff. It does market entry also, which the media doesn't do. But for insights of this nature, we are actually walking into a space the media has vacated. And this is true for many democracies, not just India.
And I find that these false narratives, false news, opinionated, openly aligned reports are then used by political people, by ideologues to further their own agendas using credible or allegedly credible, I don't think they're credible anymore, institutions of the West to support their view. Because New York Times has said it, it's the word of God.
But people are seeing through it now.
I mean, I saw through it. I mean, I didn't see through it for a long time. But I think 5 or 7 years ago, I stopped talking to these outlets because they would use my quote and to sort of bring some sort of a fake balance. And they would use, a selective, they would distort my quote. So I've stopped talking to them. But at a mass level, there is still this thing. And I'm amazed that in this election, I think, took it to next level. I mean, it was always there. It was, you were slightly apologetic or you were slightly understated. This time it was brazen.
You see, even governments and companies are responding to this now. But this exactly what you said about being selectively quoted by one media outlet or the other. When I was in Rashtrapati Bhavan, I was the spokesperson to the president and his press secretary and speechwriter. there were a couple of times when the media would call me up and say, has this happened or not happened? And I would say something and find that 3 words had been quoted or 5 words had been quoted. So then I finally started saying, I'm not going to speak to the media. I will speak to the media, I'll speak to anyone. But before I speak to the media, I will tweet out something or issue a statement. It's a tweet plus a press release, but the tweet is more direct, saying exactly what has happened. In 140 characters or whatever, 280 characters. And the press release would also go out at the same time saying exactly that. Press release could be ignored because it doesn't go to ordinary people, it goes only to media outlets. But the tweet is there. So I said, if someone didn't call me, I said, look, the tweet is out there, this place, it's out there. You want me to repeat the tweet, I'll repeat it. You want me to give you more details, I'll give you more details. But the facts are in the tweet. And that, in a sense, made me less vulnerable to somebody using a part of my quote or misquoting me, perhaps without, malice. Sometimes you don't understand what the person has said and you just, you say something different. That's also possible. I mean, it's not that every journalist is malicious. There could be genuine mistakes. But disintermediation and going straight, which is what social media allows us.
Which is what Prime Minister Modi was able to do before he became when he was a candidate.
And now the PM Modi was the first to, in India actually, to see that.
Yes.
But now, many governments, big companies are seeing the value of that.
Yeah, look at Trump. I mean, he's all through the election, he was there.
Frankly, we're talking about Modi and Trump. They're politicians. It's not just politicians. You're seeing businesses doing that as well. And which should make the media even more worried. That ultimately, what is my USP? If people are communicating directly, what is the value add I offer apart from either slanted opinion or a shouting match on or 9 o'clock, one way or the other?
I think what they have in their favor is a bad habit called newspaper. Despite knowing all this, we get about several newspapers at home every day.
I'm going to say something very strange. For someone who started his life in a newspaper and grew up in a family that read every newspaper possible, I've stopped buying newspapers.
Really? You managed to do that?
Since COVID, I've stopped buying newspapers. Not that I don't read newspapers. I read them online. My company has a few subscriptions, so that also helps. But I don't buy the physical paper anymore.
We still have that bad habit. So is this going to get worse now? Is it going to become a travel across the world?
The crisis in media.
This pandemic of fake news, of like you don't need to report facts. You just report your opinion.
Look, take a sort of 360, 30,000 foot view. When there is technology disruption I'm sure when the printing press came in the 16th century or 15th century, whenever Gutenberg invented the printing press, I'm sure that also led to some sort of a communication dissonance. Okay, I'm sure it did. Okay.
No, to that extent, the printing press was then replaced with the radio by the TV, the TV by the video by...
But eventually an equilibrium came in. So I'm sure an equilibrium will come here also. But right now we're in the midst of frenzy.
You mentioned, and this is my last question, you mentioned the Indian right and both, in America, not even right-wing papers and left-wing both. Now, across this year, this has been a year of elections. And across the world, but at least in the major geographies, we have seen a rightward shift in voting patterns, be it EU. India, I don't consider BJP to be right as in the manner that is defined in those silos. I think India has been able to maintain the infinity of its options within political structures as well. So in India, you have left and others. And I think this humongous, multi-layered, universal part, which is part of our culture, shows up in various parties, including the BJP. But there has been a generally right wing. So Europe has gone right, Argentina, now US, alleged right. You think this is a right left? Because when I see it from a distance, 30,000 feet, I see it as a failure of governance. In EU, for instance, in Europe, the inability or unwillingness to address law and order issues, law and order problem, and convert it into which becomes an immigration problem, which gets synthesized into a right versus left. While actually the problem is just these some immigrants running amok. Same in America. Do you think this is a rightward swing, or there is more to this recession, joblessness? You just need somebody to hang your angst on that, okay, under him, I lost my job, so he's a bad guy. I will try this fellow.
Look, I'm a little wary of labeling it simply right and left. Incidentally, the UK also saw elections this year. The left of centre government came to office. So there are variations. Frankly, I'm a little wary of these labels right and left anymore, because the right and left meant something in the period of the French Revolution, when these terms were coined in the French National Assembly. They meant something through the Cold War. One was an American system, one was a non-American Soviet system with a certain political ideology, with a certain mechanism of organizing the economy, and a certain strategic position in the world. Today, I don't know what they mean, to be honest, because if you look at Trump, he's right-wing in that he's nationalist, patriotic, believes in American identity. But as you said, he is not an instinctive free trader. He believes in industrial policy, as did Biden, of course, but who was allegedly a left-winger. But Trump believes in industrial policy. Trump believes in state intervention to fix economic imbalances. Trump does not believe in unbridled immigration or free trade, which are all traditional right-wing positions. Okay, whatever right-wing might have meant in those days. What we are seeing today across the world, across democracies, is enormous restlessness and dislocation, because old economic models and verities are changing. The economic change we are seeing right now will probably settle in about 20 years or 30 years, but is the biggest in some centuries. It is enormous. It's a global shift. It's a shift from Europe to the Euro-Atlantic to the Indo-Pacific. The economies of the Indo-Pacific are now perhaps larger than the economies of the Euro-Atlantic scene collectively. Asia has crossed Europe, if I'm not mistaken, in terms of its collective GDP, if I'm not mistaken.
No, you're not mistaken.
Okay. And
Japan, India, China.
So all of this is leading to an economic restlessness and dislocation, where technology is taking away jobs, trade is taking away jobs. It's also leading to, and this has been magnified in a time of digital communities, it's leading to a questioning about identity. Who do I belong to? Where do I belong? Okay. People who are going through this predicament are searching for answers. It's easy to label them right or left or bigoted or liberal. I don't think it's that simplistic. The white blue-collar worker in America who just wants a better life, he wants the same life his father and grandfather or mother and grandmother had, and he wants to pass it on to his children in the same neighborhood where he's lived all his life. But he knows that's not possible anymore for his children and grandchildren. He's looking for some sort of security for his job, for his society. He's looking to the government to be the final guarantor. He's looking for a new leader to hang his mask to depend on. This person voted for Obama, a black man, in 2008 and 2012. He voted for Trump in 2016 and now 2020. Was he bigoted then, and is he liberal, or was he liberal then and is he bigoted now? I don't think so. He's just a person looking to find an answer to his or her existential crisis.
That's what I also feel. But this labeling that suddenly comes out, right and this and that, and as though right is bad.
That's too bad. I mean, I don't call, like you, I don't call the Narendra Modi government
not at all
a right-wing government.
Look,
I actually call it an India-first government.
Look, Ashok, no Indian who has India in his bones can fit into this box other than left. I know. I've tried to understand this left, right, conservative, liberal, all this thing, but I don't fit in because we are Vishal. We are beyond all this.
I like to believe I'm a libertarian, but every day in India, looking at the inequalities in India, looking at the variations in India, is a compromise against textbook libertarianism. It is. Okay. And no country, no government in India, whether it's a BJP government, Congress government, Trinamool Congress government, Telugu Desam government, can not be alive to that. So this right and left beyond a certain point are meaningless, especially, as you said, in our context, in the Indian context. And people ask me, is the BJP government or Mr. Modi is a right wing, or is he centre right, or is he ideological? I said no. I think he's just India first.
Yeah, I think that's a good definition. Yeah.
And for me, India first is an ideology I can be happy to live with all my life.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Ashok.
Thank you so much.
It's been a great conversation.
Yes, it has.
And thank you for joining us. And we'll be back again with another exciting conversation. Namaste.